Hi, my name is Joe, and this is my testimony in support of Pastor David Gates' message. I'm going to be reading from this system. I'm not 100% sure what this means, but sometime in 2016, I began to notice that each time I checked my phone to know the time, I will see that the time was either 12:44 or 19:44 or 03:44 or 06:44. It was always at the 44th minute, meaning 16 minutes to the hour, to the next hour. As an Adventist who was well aware of the meaning of 1844, I found this intriguing. I began to note down how many times within a given day I saw the time at the 44th minute. But after some times, I lost interest in this tabulation because it became boring and I did not see any meaning in the exercise. However, shortly after this idea of the 44th minute had enjoyed my attention, I got a text message one Sabbath afternoon from my friend and brother, Emenike Elechi, who sent me a special happy Sabbath message that read like a congratulation. The message brought my attention to the fact that that Sabbath, which was on the 22nd of October 2016, marked the 172nd year after the great disappointment of 1844. I could not help wondering if this was why my attention had been drawn to the 44th minute over the past several weeks before that special Sabbath day. I was happy with Emenike's message, and I took time to think about the sanctuary doctrine and its pivotal role in the Adventist message. I could not see anything beyond that because 172 to my mind was not a special number. Things may have been a bit different if the year 2016 was, for example, the 100th year after 1844, the 1844 Great Disappointment. I may have thought that God was trying to draw my attention to something. I believe I would also have wondered a bit if 2016 was the 144th year after 1844. In any case, life went back to normal after that day, but I became conscious that we were now 172 years away from 1844. In other words, the investigative judgment had lasted for 172 years. Later events will prove that this awareness was what God wanted me to have. It will appear that God wanted to bring closer to my mind the fact that by 2016, the investigative judgment had lasted for 172 years already. Life was about to return to normal for me, and it did return to normal until the Thursday following that Sabbath day, that is, the 27th of October 2016. On that day, I was at an auto mechanic workshop servicing my car. My younger brother, Williams, was in my house. He normally did not stay with us, but had come to visit us a few days earlier. I think I called to tell him something, but I remember that I also told him to tell my wife to cook rice and beans for me because I was hungry and would be returning home not too long from then. The big issue is that at the end of that call, my phone brought out its pop-up message, and the credit balance was exactly 1,844 naira and 75 kobo. I use an MTN SIM card in my mobile phone, and every time I make a call, the network sends a pop-up message telling me how many seconds my call had lasted, how many seconds my call had lasted, how much the call cost me, and what amount was left as my balance. The amount left as balance after that call to my brother was not written in words. It was written in numbers, and it was exactly 1844:75, 1844.75. In a very powerful way, many things came together in my mind at once, and I could not resist the thought. Neither have I been able to resist the thought until this very moment that God was telling me that even though just a few days before that day, the investigative judgment had lasted for 172 years already, it was not going to last more than 175 years. The key was that my credit balance had both 1844 and the number 75. What this meant was that from several weeks before the 22nd of October 2016, God was preparing my mind so that when Brother Emenike's message came to me, I would understand the implication, or else be in the mood to take it more seriously, or else be in the mood to wonder why I had been seeing the time at the 44th minute several weeks before then. I took time to prayerfully analyze the meaning of the revelation. Questions flooded my mind. Did this mean that probation was going to close on the 22nd of October 2019, which was when the investigative judgment will have lasted for 175 years? I rejected that idea after some time because as a Bible student, I did not believe that God will ever tell any man the exact day that probation will close. That information was too sensitive, and so I just dismissed the thought, being careful, however, not to throw away the baby with the bathwater. After thinking and discarding several theories to explain what the message I had received could mean, I finally settled for the idea that God was telling me that the investigative judgment will not go beyond 175 years. That view is still what I consider most valid up until this very moment. But that was not the end of the matter. About 9 days after the 1844.75 message, Donald John Trump, against all forecasts and predictions, won the contest for the seat of the President of the United States. Like most mortals, I had expected Hillary Clinton to win. When Trump was eventually ratified by the Electoral College, I could not help but reason that his reign was going to be in fulfillment of Revelation chapter 7. For those who understand Bible prophecy, my point is that I began to see Trump as a tool in the hands of the four angels holding the four winds from blowing on the earth and on every man and on every tree. I have never been able to tell anybody about this experience, including my wife, because I felt that a certain message that God had earlier given to me was more important than this 1844.75 message. To me, the 1844.75 message was for my consumption alone and was meant to help me understand and properly situate the broader message I had already been given. The only reason why I'm writing down this testimony on this Sabbath day, 24th of November 2018, is because of a message by Pastor David Gates I listened to about 3 or 4 days ago. I understood David Gates' message, and I have no right to question its authenticity because, although I love God, I have given up trying to understand His ways. I have since decided that I will be toying with hypertension if I tried to understand everything that God does. Note that I am stating this in spite of the fact that David Gates' message about probation ending in the spring of 2019 is a bit different from mine. But who says it is actually different? David Gates said that probation was ending for the church. Perhaps the message I got is different from his because it applies to the end of probation for the entire world. This will mean that both messages are complementary and that both are correct. Perhaps David Gates' message means that after the spring of 2019, the corporate Seventh-day Adventist Church will have lost its place as God's remnant church. I do not know. But it may interest you to know that there was actually a specific instruction that God gave me on the last day of July 2015. But I've decided not to include it here so as not to complicate this testimony. The instruction I received from God was about a specific action I needed to take on the first day of August 2015, which happened to be a Sabbath day. The point to note here is that the instruction I am referring to perfectly harmonizes with the things David Gates recently said about the SDA Church and the General Conference, even though I knew nothing about these things when I got the instruction in 2015. Note that I have interpreted the message I got on the 27th of October 2016 to mean that probation will not last until 176 years after the investigative judgment began. I was challenged to state my own testimony because David Gates, while delivering his message, categorically and repeatedly said that witnesses from other places in the world will speak up to confirm his message. I guess this is one of such confirmation. I do not know how God will harmonize issues because the broader message that God had given me, already referred to, contains things I am sure David Gates does not currently agree with. In fact, it will take a major miracle for David Gates to believe part of the message God revealed to me, but here am I being used to confirm a message he received. When President Donald Trump was sworn into office on the 20th of January 2017, I don't know why I suddenly decided that I wanted to count the number of weeks between his swearing in and the 22nd of October 2019, which is the day by which the investigative judgment would have lasted exactly 175 years. I was both afraid and excited when I discovered that the number of weeks between Trump's inauguration and the 22nd of October 2019 was about 144 weeks. 20th of January 2017 to 25th October 2019 is exactly 144 weeks. I began to get disturbed after this discovery, but I could not help seeing it as a confirmation of the 1844.75 message. What exactly was God trying to tell me? I knew about the 144,000, and I knew that the holding of the winds by the four angels of Revelation 7 was primarily and specifically to allow them to be sealed before the plagues began to fall. Now, I was getting to realize that President Trump will have reigned for about 144 weeks by the week that the investigative judgment gets to its 175th year, a time that had been revealed to me as a sort of expiry date for that judgment. But I got even yet another confirmation. One problem I had was what to do with Israel. Based on the Bible, I'm a believer in the teaching that Luke 21:24 refers to the regathering of the Jews in Israel after their dispersion, which occurred in AD 70 when Jerusalem was destroyed. Our Lord Jesus also gave a specific sign about the nearness of his second coming, using the fig tree and making it apparent that the generation that saw the sprouting of the fig tree was the very generation that will not pass away until they saw him coming again. In summary, if Israel is that fig tree, and if a generation is taken at 70 years, Israel was going to turn 70 in 2018, which will be 1 year earlier than the 2019 terminal date had been given. If Jesus said that the generation will not pass away until he returns, how could I harmonize things with the revelation I had been given? By 2019, Israel will be 71 and not 70 years old. The generation will have passed away. I worried and prayed about this inconsistency until one day when I believed that God began to open my eyes to see something I had not considered before. I was counting from 1948, when Israel declared independence and became a nation. But the count ought to have begun with the first generation of an independent Israel. The first Prime Minister of Israel, who was born inside the land of Israel after 1948, is the current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. I was led to believe that Benjamin Netanyahu was the best representation of the generation that Christ was referring to because of his interesting history. Not only was he part of the first set of boys to be born inside Israel as a nation after the dispersion of AD 70, he was also Israel's first prime minister to be born inside Israel after the 1948 independence. Furthermore, the first time Netanyahu became prime minister of Israel was in 1996. He was only 47 years then, making him the youngest Israeli to ever be prime minister. Besides, Netanyahu is now said to be Israel's longest serving prime minister. For now, he seems to be tied with David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister. But more importantly, I got to find out that Netanyahu was born on the 21st of October 1949, just 3 months after Israel signed the last of 3 truce agreements that allowed it to begin to exist as a free nation. So, Netanyahu forms the first batch of Israelis to be in a liberated Israel. For those who may not know, as soon as Israel declared independence in 1948, 5 Arab nations declared war against Israel, and Israel had to fight from that very day until July 1949, when that 3rd truce agreement was signed. So, using Netanyahu as the best representation of the generation that Christ had in mind, I was shocked to realize that one day before the date I had been given, namely 22nd of October 2019, Benjamin Netanyahu was going to turn exactly 70 years. If it is his generation that will not pass, does that mean that Christ will come before that generation gets to 71 years? To cut a long story short, the summary of what I now believe has been revealed to me is that probation could end anytime after the 22nd of October 2019. But whatever happens, it will never last up to the 22nd of October 2020. Meaning that the investigative judgment will never last up to its 176th year. This is what I believe to be the meaning behind the 1844.75 message I was given in 2016. Now you understand why I never told anybody about this. But now that Pastor Gates has said what he said recently, I do not feel I should keep quiet anymore. However, like I already hinted, there is a broader message that God had revealed to me, which is the main issue as far as I'm concerned. The message is titled The Last Message of Mercy, and it is based on Revelation 18:1-4. Those who want that message should send an email to the repeated second angel message at gmail.com. The repeated second angel message at gmail.com. Before ending this testimony, let me point out that I believe that some people are missing the background of David Gates' message and discrediting it as a result. There is no biblical prophecy that warned the disciples of Christ that it will take exactly 3.5 years between when Rome initially encompassed Jerusalem and when Jerusalem will eventually be destroyed. Yet, that was what happened. For reasons we do not know, it pleased God to allow a period of exactly 3.5 years for the disciples to react to the encompassing of Jerusalem before allowing the actual destruction of that city. in spite of the fact that in the book of Revelation, that same period of time means something entirely different. There is nothing wrong with God giving another message using the historical fact of what happened in Jerusalem. Some people seem to think that as long as there is no biblical basis for determining the close of probation using the 1260-day time period of the prophecy of Revelation, and in their view, David Gates attempted to do that, that somehow discredits his message. I would like to encourage these people not to reject this sort of message based on their assumption. The stakes are just too high. God can choose to use an event in a man's life to warn that man about something in the future, and the warning message may have something to do with a number traditionally associated with a prophetic period, like 1335, 1260, or even 1290. As long as that person understands the message, that's it. Rejecting that message because the Bible had used that time period for an unrelated prophecy is not advisable. In summary, the best way to understand David Gates' message is to ignore his reference to the prophetic 3.5-year period of Revelation and to focus on his reference to that same time period with respect to the events leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. As a matter of fact, I do not know why Pastor David Gates decided to even mention the 3.5 years prophecy of Revelation. His message certainly did not need that reference, and I could not help but believe that, knowing that some people would rather reject than believe the message, our omniscient God provided them a hook to hang their doubts on through this unnecessary reference by Pastor David Gates. Knowing how things work in this life, I am convinced that there are many out there who are currently opposing the message given through Pastor David Gates, but who, curiously, have not listened to the message for themselves. What I'm sure they have listened to is the reaction to Pastor David Gates' message from other pastors whom they trust. Only time will tell who has spoken the words of God among these two sets of pastors. Thanks for listening. God bless you.